and welcome to my channel. My name is Rachel, and today I'm going to be drawing my own video game character. It's not for any specific game, it's just a general video game character, a fantasy sort of MMO fighting style character. I wanted to do this because I recently did, in my last video, a video game character as a background sort of side character, and I was really happy with the way that that turned out and wanted to render this a little bit more. So to start out, I laid down the base sketch with a red, and right here it looks pink because I lowered the opacity to put down my second sketch over top with all the details. So to start out, you do the forms first. So you start out with a circle on the head and an oval for the body and little sticks for arms. And then you start with a silhouette, which generally is just the form without the clothes. Some people do clothes, I usually don't. I like to draw all the forms of the body so I can know where the clothing is going to lay before I draw the actual clothing. So right here, I am trying to give her some expression, but it wasn't really necessary, so I didn't have her in an interesting pose or anything, just a classic video game pose. I put her hair into two ponytails because I wanted it to be a little bit interesting, but, you know, not too difficult to work with, because generally when people are rendering video game characters, you want something that is easier so that when they're moving, you don't have to animate all of those motions. So I am a little bit disappointed with the hair, actually, not because of the drawing style of it, but because of the coloring later, which we'll see. Her chest area, I was inspired by a corset that I saw and a woman's artwork, I think it was a woman anyway, on Instagram, where she did this beautiful warrior who had a lot of like silvery and gold parts on like an armor on top of a dress, and I really wanted to like capture the same feeling. So it's not going to be the same or even like the look, but I still am going to try and do metal sort of. Anyway, a lot of times when you're doing the second sketch, this is the time for you to change up your proportions if you're not happy with it. I thought that the face that I had drawn in the red underlayer was a little bit too childish, a little bit too round. I didn't really like it, so here I lengthened the face and changed up the entire thing because the eyes weren't sitting right on the new face shape. So I made new eyes, a smaller nose, and then, you know, lips. And I will skip through a few parts of this because it's not very interesting, so, and also some of my footage apparently got corrupted, so there's that. But so right now is the fine lining, and I will get rid of some of these lines, but it really helps when forming the shapes and the shadows and whatnot to already have it outlined and clean. Now you don't always have to keep these outlines. I did in this one, most of them. I did erase some of them, like I said, but this was really helpful for keeping the design a little bit more like a video game character, because Although video game characters aren't outlined, they're very clean and sharp, and when I do sketches and color on top of those, my lines tend to be a little bit more messy, a little bit more paint-like, so I wanted everything to be nice and neat in this. I didn't do any line weights, which is where you press harder to get a darker and thicker line. I didn't do that because the goal wasn't to make the line art the main part of the piece, which happens sometimes, and I do sometimes, but that wasn't the goal here. So just a simple one line is perfect for this drawing. Now, because I skipped ahead, I did skip a lot of the sketching process, but to just explain where I was coming from with the armor, I did like this little swoop thing on accident on some of the armor pieces, and I liked it because it reminded me of like, you know, fantasy armor, because there's a lot of different designs on fantasy armor when, you know, historical armor probably wasn't as fancy or even close, because you cannot have that fantasy and extravagant element because it's not real, and it's not like you can actually make all these, you know, complicated designs because they're heavy and complicated. So I liked the swoop, so I added it into a lot of different places on the drawing in the armor. I didn't add it really in the clothing. I suppose you could say that her neckline is reminiscent of the shape, but it wasn't intentional. But you can see on her hand, on her wrist kind of cuff thing, on her shoulder plating, and on her leg plates, there are those swoops. And also on her sword, I added just a little bit because, again, if I matched the sword to the armor, the character would look more cohesive. I'm not exactly too happy with the hands and other things like that because realistic hands are not my strong suit. So some of these look a little bit more accurate to video game characters than others, but I was happy with where I came from so far. I'm not really sure if any of these things are practical. I wasn't going for practicality, I was going for, does this look cool or not? So hopefully it looks cool. I don't know. I am really proud of it. I think that the drawing or coloring part was really good because I got some more textures in there, and I felt like I really differentiated between the shiny metal and the soft fabric. Because usually, since I color with the same brush and do the same type of shading, it's kind of hard to tell. And with the shading style, it looks a little bit blended into the same sort of material. But this time I used some different styles of things and different colors and different shading techniques, and I think it turned out a lot better. So as we continue here, I'm just finishing up the line art. I wasn't really happy with that hand or the feet in particular because I hadn't sketched it out, so I didn't exactly know what was going to happen with it. I think I'm happy with it, but you know, feet is not my strong suit unless they're high heels because I draw pretty women, so high heels. But I wanted them to have like sort of a spike texture because I really love dragons and their horns and whatever and whatnot. And I was going to make those sort of like made out of bone when I colored it in, but I ended up making some of them, or most of them, metal and gold and silver. I guess it's not silver. What would it be? Iron? I don't know. Don't ask me. I just drew it. So on this one though, I think I did do some boning work, and I tried to make it as asymmetrical but still connected as possible. That doesn't really make any sense, but I'm not good at drawing the same thing twice. So I tried to make each side different on the arms and the legs and the feet. Everything except, I guess, the hands and the top were supposed to be asymmetrical so that it could just be easier for me. So now I'm starting on the coloring. So I'm doing a different layer for everything. The two different sketches were on a different layer. The inking is on a different layer. The skin will be on a different layer than the clothes. All of that. It's really handy because I'm usually a traditional artist, so if you mess up, you kind of just gotta cry or like ink over it, and it doesn't really look too good. But with this, you can erase everything and change everything without erasing the layer underneath, which is really nice. I always go back and make changes based on inconsistencies, and here I'm adding the swoop kind of pattern back into the leg because I really enjoyed it. So the skin was difficult because I usually fully render skin. I apparently didn't film it, but when rendering skin, you have to go lighter on the shading than you think you would. As if you can see, the shading on the neck or the hand is not as dark compared to the face or the lighter parts of the hand as you would think. And then you have to isolate the highlights with I used an airbrush, but you can use anything that gives you like a soft look when I usually use paint strokes like you see now. Here I'm doing the hair, which I ended up changing a lot of things off camera because I wasn't too happy with the style, and I had seen some things that gave me more inspiration to do a more realistic style. So right now I'm just blocking in the shadows and the highlights. I used 3 or 4 colors for each: a mid-tone base, a highlight, a low light, and a darker low light. Sometimes I used a mid-highlight color because the highlight was usually like a sort of neon color, but sometimes I didn't, so it just depends on what you want. I wanted a lot more variety in the purple than I did in the pink because the purple was going to be in the most shadow, so that's why I used more colors for that. And orange is hard to shade because, you know, a dark orange is just kind of a poop brown, so you have to add red into it to make it into a nicer brown so it doesn't look like crap when you're shading it. If you end up using too much brown or too much dark in orange, generally it looks less orange and more brown, and the brown starts to take over. So you really want to focus on highlighting from the orange instead of, shading. Now, with the hair, I didn't do many brush changes. I only did a line, I think it was the gel pen or the technical pen for the line art, the square brush for the basic blocking in of colors, and later I will do the other stuff. Apparently I did film it. I just put it out of order. That's great. But here we go. So I did try and cut some stuff out of this, actually. I remember editing it now. Apparently I'm not very good at editing, but my editing software is also bad, so I can't change that. So this is the order that you're getting it in. Things are a little out of order. It's fine. Don't panic. But, okay, so here, the most common problem people have is making the face just look like a circle or overshading the face. Now, what you need to do is find the planes of the face, in which direction they're pointing. For example, the nose points outward, the cheekbones point upward, the forehead goes out and thus curves around on the edges, and then you see which parts would be in light. My light source is coming from the right side of the screen, so the right cheekbone, well, I guess her left, our right cheekbone is going to be light, whereas the other one is going to be dark. The darkness is also going to cover her right eye, which would be our left, to sort of make that socket more visible. And it's hard to do shadows, and I've never really been good at shadows and creating depth myself because it's hard to imagine where things would go. But if you simplify it down into blocky forms first, like I am, and then you blend it out, it's much easier to imagine those planes instead of trying to go immediately into detail. Now, one thing I don't like about the blending is how uneven the blending is, and this is actually not a problem with me. Well, it is. It would be smooth if I spent like 2 hours on everything, but I'm not going to do that. I think it's the brush that I'm using. It could be just Procreate doesn't like me, but you know. I generally try to spend a good amount of time on blending, but I get lazy real quick, so it ends up being a little bit less well blended. And I actually think that worked to my favor in the clothing. Everything else, not so much. But so here I am trying to blend the hand. And if you can see, I used kind of an orangey brown for most of the shadows. And that's good because it gives the illusion of flesh, because, you know, flesh isn't just one tone, and a lot of the time it either has like a neutral, cool, or reddish tone underneath. So if you put that in, it kind of is like when you put blush on. So it does look natural, but you also need to add a sort of bluer shadow to different parts, because if you don't add the bluer shadow, it doesn't look alive, because it looks like, well, blue shadows happen anyway because, you know, it gets warmer closer to the light, gets colder, you know, closer to the dark. But if you don't put in those blue shadows, it's not realistic, because there are going to be blue shadows like that in real life. If you shade it just like that, it looks like a drawing. And of course it's going to look like a drawing in the end, because I am not patient enough to spend enough time to make it look like an actual person, but here we go. Well, anyway, so generally with my blue shading, I try to be very light and very, very, here's my sort of bluish brownish shade. Apparently I might not have done blue shading, but blue doesn't mean like you put blue on the face. It just means that you use a cooler tone. So this could have been my cool tone brown, but I can't see it very well because crappy editing software. And I also just choked on my own everything. So that's great. Anyway, so like I was saying, cool tones can come in anything. Usually, if it's a cooler tone, it'll be more of a red brown instead of an orange brown. If it's like a pink, it'll have a purple tone on the bottom. And you can create these tones by mixing blue, like putting a light layer of blue on top, and then eyedropping that color, or just mixing it in with your paints, depending on if you're a traditional or not. And then seeing what color that would be and using that. But it's not always necessary. You don't have to. It'll just take your piece to the next level, you know, because we're fancy. So moving on to the highlights here, I am using a pen, a liner really, to create that illusion of a highlight, which happens to be different than the square brush that I normally use because it gives a harder look. a more abrupt sort of look, and you want that for highlights because it's your center point. It's what you're drawing attention to create that depth. And I used the pen in the ear because I am lazy and I didn't feel like going back to another brush. So it doesn't look as good as the rest of the face, but we're going to ignore that. I didn't do the lips yet because lips are the bane of my existence on the human face. But everything else I tried to keep within this same area of skin. I try to separate everything out so everything's nice and orderly. So skin, hair, whatnot. And here you see my actual bluish brown tone. I do big swoops because it's easier for me to plot out the planes of the face on with bigger brushes rather than smaller brushes, and also it makes the tone a little bit more even. So here I'm starting on the hair, and I wasn't exactly sure what color to make it. I didn't know what color I wanted from this. Usually video game characters come in a range of colors, so that didn't help me at all. But I landed on this orange color because my favorite anime character is Urza Scarlet, and she has red hair, which is not orange. But she has a hairstyle that reminds me of this, and I didn't want to do exactly the same color, and I was like, what's the closest thing to red? And I was like, it's either orange or purple, and I wanted to do a warm tone, and purple's more of a cool tone because you mix blue with red, obviously. So I landed on orange, but I didn't like it. It looks bad, not gonna lie. So again, I wasn't happy with the hair, but when I mixed the pink and the purple with it, it was all right. I still wasn't too happy with it, but it was the best I got. So I apparently didn't ink in all the parts that I wanted to, so that was me fixing that there. And I was a little bit messy with this because I wasn't very happy with it. And when I am frustrated, I end up going a little bit messier, which is not good because then you have to come back in and erase all of that crap. And if you just outline it, it's easier. But do I listen to that? No, I don't. And I do everything messy. Apparently, I did not record a lot of this. So either that or my order is messed up again. I am so sorry about that. Usually I'm a little bit more coordinated. Maybe not. Physically, I am very, very uncoordinated, but mentally I'm usually good. What is going on today? I don't know. But if you can see here, I have already done the shirt, which is purple to match the hair, and the armor, which is silver. I did armor last week, so I do think that if I actually don't have the footage in here, it's fine. I generally don't like to color armor because it's not good. It doesn't look good. And it just doesn't look shiny. It looks like kind of matte. Really, I added the usual highlights that I do abruptly, which helps, but I think I just wasn't in the zone for that, so I did come back and change it, and I didn't mess around with it anymore at this point because I didn't feel like I had the ability to do it. And sometimes that's okay. You just gotta accept you can't do everything. I don't accept that too easily, so moving on. But the shirt was pretty easy, and you'll see it when I color this cape thing. I have no idea what this is. I wanted her to have a skirt, but skirts aren't like practical. This isn't very practical either, but I thought it would be a little bit more acceptable because it's a cape and not a skirt. So she still has pants. So if she needs to take it off, she can, I guess. And I added pink because pink matches the hair. So every color is because it matches the hair. in some form or another. So I did color the armor. You know what? I think it orders everything out of order on my editing software, and I think I knew that before. So I planned it out better. But here we have the basic coloring of the armor. I'm a mess today. A mess. But as you can see, it's just a lot of blending the dark shadow into the lighter mid-tone. And it's just a lot of blending to make it look smooth. And I think that's where I went wrong, because you don't really want to blend armor. You want to make like abrupt lines. Now, obviously not so abrupt that it's like two different colors, but I think what I did was I made the dark color too dark, and what I needed was another mid-tone to separate between the light and the dark color instead of blending it. And that way it would have looked more like armor, and it would have blended better into the different colors. That's just my theory, though. I could have been completely wrong, and it would have looked horrible if I did it either way. But, yeah, and I had a few issues with the armor itself, just the design of it. If you look at her, well, it's her left, our right. If you look at her left knee, does that look like it can bend to you? I don't think it can. And this corset, it's made out of metal. Does that seem practical? Probably not, but I really like those really beautiful, really unpractical characters, impractical characters that are just like stunning in video games. And I think that maybe there is something to be said about like the sexualization of women in video games, but I tried not to do that too much. As in, like, I covered her chest, I made her very modest, but I still think that this is kind of like a sexy design, in my head anyway, because, you know, you wear cool armor and amazing, but I'm not sure if I like that line on her thigh. It just doesn't sit right with me. I was trying to do the curve thing that I did on everything else, but I just think it's like not curvy enough, because everything is coming up in a curve, and that one's just going straight across. Like, it doesn't look right compared to everything else. So continuing on with the armor, at this point I got a little bit tired of it and started just randomly blending and trying to make it look good, and it just wasn't coming out the way that I wanted to. I wanted it to be cool tone, so as you can see, I was trying to put in some cool tone colors, but that didn't work too well, in my opinion anyway, because it just kind of looks blue, and cool tones are blue, but it looks more like a pale blue, like a, I don't know, like a pastel color rather than a highlight. And I think it blended out nicely, but it wasn't what I was going for. And then we get to the white highlights, which I think saved it a little bit at this point, and that's why I ended up being happy with it at this point, moving on. But, you know, I do end up changing it to make it look more like armor, so it doesn't look like... It kind of looks like how they paint medieval armor when they like paint it with oil paints and it's really smooth looking and stuff like that. That's not how I wanted it to look. I wanted it to look like real armor. And I did look up a reference later, but not in the beginning. And I changed it off camera. So as you can see now, there are more harsh lines. There are more swoops in the, I don't know what the right word for that is, in the highlights and shadows, so it's a little bit more rough. So it looks like real shines, and it looks like real texture in there. So again, with the cool shadows, I always think that you need cool shadows, but sometimes you don't, depending on your lighting, but the point is most of the time you need cool shadows. So for the back part of the stupid cape skirt thing. I ended up going with more purple plum color rather than a pink because gold shadows. So, and for the fabric part, the folded part, I think I went a little too overboard with the folds. You honestly, just like the skin, you don't need that much variety. I try to smooth it out, but I'm just not sure it works. So, moving on to the corset. I wanted black. I didn't care that there wasn't any black anywhere else in the drawing. I wanted it. And I think it does look nice. I wish I had added it in other places, like maybe in some of the swoops of the armor and made it like a dark plating on top of the armor. But I'm still very happy with it. And it made me realize that I had a lot of problems in the corset itself because I was being lazy with the coloring. So there, I fixed it. I did add black in some spots, but because it's black, it's not very noticeable. You know what I mean? So like her pants are black. This little section on her arms, like the straps, are black. But the problem is that you can't see them very well. Your eye doesn't ever draw to black. Just like it draws to white. It draws to bright colors like neons, but it never draws to black. So all you really notice is that there's a black corset because it's a big spot on there separated by light areas. And then just like you notice the absence of pieces. You don't really notice, oh, there's a black strap over there because you're not looking for that. So I do think I could have designed it a little bit better, but I also didn't want any of the colors to clash and end up like blending together. So I didn't want like pink to touch pink or purple to touch purple. I wanted purple to touch pink, to touch gray, to touch black. I didn't want there to be any noticeable blending because that's just not how I style my clothes. I mean, if you have monochrome clothing, it makes sense, but if you have all different colors and you only have like 2 colors that are the same touching, it's annoying. So that's not what I do. I played with the eye color a bit there, but I wasn't sure. Oh, we're going very out of order today. Apparently, I painted the dress after the top of the dress after I did everything else. So this was supposed to be a sort of vest. I'm not sure if it comes across like that. I think it doesn't. I think it just comes across as another shirt. It's not what I was going for, but it's okay. I think the biggest problem that I had with this was texturing, probably. If I had used texturing and made it look a little bit more thicker and stiff, then it probably would have looked like a vest, but at the moment, it just looks like she threw on like an evening gown top over her regular warrior shirt. It still looks cute, and I like that it matches the skirt cape thing, but it wasn't the best. And I added wrinkles into it because I did realize that it looked more like cloth and not a vest. So I kind of ruined the vest thing myself, but I still think it looks nice. I did some shading, so made the side of her chest darker and the upper part that is facing the light source lighter. I made the parts underneath the armor darker, and I darkened up a few bits, which I think was unnecessary because I did like it how it was. Although I do like overly rendered things. It's not realistic in the way that I was going for. It is very, very much overly rendered. Like if you put up the contrast on your picture, if you had a really wrinkly shirt on, that's what all of my drawings would look like. But anyway, we are now adding the gold. My favorite part, and also my least favorite part, because although I love gold, I hate shading gold. For gold, like I said last week, you need to shade it with like an orangey red and also a green, but I didn't do the green this time because, you know, it wouldn't match my color scheme, so I didn't. I looked at the same reference that I looked at for the silver armor, and I colored it like that. So basically, you kind of outline it, not really. You leave a little bit of space on the outside, but you basically outline the shape in like half of the shape in a darker brownish color, and then you color in between the two areas. This does not sound good. But because I don't draw it on here because I did do it off camera. Basically, like it would be like a U shape and then like an L, like a lowercase L in the U. So it would be an A, like a curvy capital A. And that would make the dark part. And you want to make everything a little bit jaggedy. So when I'm hearing myself explain this, it sounds so stupid, but it makes sense if you like look at it. You want to make it jaggedy so that it's rough and stuff and it's not just a smooth line, because then it looks like a low glow graphics. I'm not sure, but I didn't have the tools that most digital artists have when they create video game characters, and I think this is because they have more experience. So this is the final piece. I'm pretty happy with it, and I'm sorry that I couldn't explain it as well as I wanted to. Bye.